Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Fusion Strike, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at a really fun one prize based archetype, focusing all around Pachirisu from the latest set, Brilliant Stars. This is going to be the return of Tool Drop, thanks to these two new Pokemon that we are getting from this set. Honchkrow V has the ability allowing us to attach 4 tools onto it instead of the usual 1, which means we can really ramp up our damage output with the new Pachirisu, which is just a little glass cannon, really, 70 hit points. With this 2 energy attack, we can do 30 times the number of tools attached to all of our Pokemon. So if we get into that sort of 10, 11 range of tools on the board, we can one-hit KO even VMAXs, and that's possible thanks to Honchkrow being in play. You know, a couple of those, both having 4 tools on them, gets you up to 8, and then you can scatter the tools around, you know, other Pachirisu and other Pokemon that come into play, so that the Wind-Up Thunder is actually taking big one-hit KOs. So, yeah, the Honchkrow allows this deck to have much higher damage output potential than you otherwise would have. So that's really what we're going for here. And because we are going to be filling our deck with an unnaturally high amount of tools, we are going to look towards having hit point buffing cards to make the Honchkrow much tankier. So hopefully it's basically ignored by the opponent because it has 2 higher hit points to be worth, you know, taking a 2-prize KO on, because we are limited to the amount of tools we can play, of course. And if these Honchkrows are starting to get one-hit KO'd, our damage output drops dramatically. We lose 120 damage straight out of the gate. So that's a huge problem. So we're really going to need to play a lot of hit point buffs so that Honchkrow stays out of range and is unattainable for a lot of decks, because you actually can play a lot of hit point buffs to make these Honchkrows pretty difficult to target for the most part. So let's jump into the list. And Pachirisu is going to be your main attacker. We're playing 4 copies of it. Because we aren't playing any Pokemon Recovery, we are also playing a couple copies of Raikou V in here. Raikou serves a couple of purposes. It actually has a fleet-footed ability, which can allow you to draw a card here and there, which is never a bad thing. But it then opens up an attack in Lightning Rondo, which isn't based on tools, which is kind of nice, you know, because sometimes in the opening turns, you're lacking that pressure. You haven't drawn enough cards for your deck to be actually doing good damage with Pachirisu. So you can come in early with a Raikou, like turn 2, something like that, and actually put reasonable damage into the face, which is always decent. And it means that we don't need to play these annoying like recovery cards to sort of chain Pachirisus. Instead, we have this Raikou that can come in. We play Shopping Center as well, so we can like Cape of Toughness up the Raikou in that sort of mid to late game to try and make him chunky as a 2-prize Pokemon, which is kind of cool. And he has more stable damage output, I would say. If everything's gone wrong, you know, if we're up against a part of the peak deck, for example, we can at least do some stable damage with Raikou. So that's kind of nice. I like him being a 2-of in the deck. And sometimes he will be the optimal, like, opening attacker, and then you lead into the Pachirisus later on, based on sort of the matchups and how your hand lines up, because you need to find a lot of tools early on to be doing good damage with Pachirisu by turn 2. But we are playing 3 copies of Honchkrow. You could potentially go for the full 4 just because of prizing being an issue. And you do want these genuinely in play straight away, because you really hate having those hands where you have too many tools for the amount of Pokemon that you have in play. But as soon as you find one Honchkrow, you know, 4 tools immediately go straight onto that guy. And that's going to clear the hand nicely for like a research play. So there is an argument to go all the way up to the 4 count, knowing that you basically only ever put 2 into play in the majority of situations, unless one is knocked out. So having a 3 gives you a bit of a safety net there. Then we have a couple Crobat and a Lumineon. Hopefully the Dark asset can draw us a bunch of cards. Lumineon getting us into research can help us draw a bunch of cards. Never a bad thing. And we are also playing Manaphy. Obviously we're going to have a lot of pretty easy to KO 2 prizes with the Lumineon and the Crobat. So we can try and buff these as well with big charms and capes and stuff like that to put them a little bit out of range. But, you know, the Manaphy is going to help protect us there. And because part of our acceleration comes via Exp.Share, we need to be able to protect double Pachirisu on the board. You know, the one that's active and attacking, the one that's on the bench with no energy but only Exp.Share attached. That's going to be really important. So the Manaphy are going to be really important for the Urshifu and Jolteon matchups in and around here. So yeah, a nice one-off to have. Obviously, it's not set in stone because, again, we're playing no recovery. If you are more concerned about the spreading matchups, we could go towards like a carrier or something like that. The ball search is pretty simple and streamlined because we have to commit so much space to our tools. So we're just playing 3 level 4 quick, and I have squeezed in a capture energy as well. I think because you have the 4 Patchy and the 2 Raikou, you lead these often enough to warrant the capture energy as a one-of, just to establish that Honchkrow, like I was saying earlier. It's the most important card to see in like the opening turn, because then all of your tools immediately become live, and you can filter the hand really nicely for a Crobat, filter the hand really nicely for a research. So very important to get that Honch down as soon as possible. May even warrant playing like Ultra Ball in here as well if you want to eat into the tool count. That sounds dicey though, so that's why we're not doing that at the moment. Then our supporters, again, we're pretty streamlined because of the amount of tools we're having to play here. So we have a couple copies of Boss, we have a couple copies of Raihan. This is really nice as a fail-safe if Exp.Share isn't live. We do have some great cool plays we can make with Shopping Center to sort of bounce our Exp.Shares around our board, but the Raihan is also super important just to maintain our Pachirisu attacks the entire game. Also helpful for the Raikou, of course, whilst also helping us find specific pieces from the deck, be it, you know, even more attachments, specific tools. If you need Choice Belt to be like a 60 damage buff that turn, that can be a really big deal. So yeah, the Raihan is a nice 2 copy of, as well as 2 copies of the new Cynthia's Aspiration, allowing us to draw until we have 8 cards if we've suffered a KO. Hopefully, you know, our opponent's going through multiple 1-prize Pokemon, with Pachirisu constantly being in the active position, so you can draw the full 8 there, which is always nice, and the research is just standard, staple, good draw. And then we are committing a lot of space to tools. We are playing 18 tool cards, which is almost a third of the deck, of course, so we are going for a split of 4 Cape, because they are the best way that we can protect our Honchkrows, protect our Crobats and Luminions, etc. 4 Choice Belt, because it's ridiculously good damage and it's fast tempo, you know, 1 tool giving us 60 damage as long as that's going to the active. 4 Air Balloon for easy movement, and it means we don't need to commit spaces to switches or ropes or anything like that. 3 Big Charm, not as good as Cape. Obviously, everything's basic, so it's just the 30 hit points rather than the 50 you'd get from the Cape of Toughness. So Big Charm comes in as a 3 count, and the Exp.Shares alongside the Raihans should allow us to chain these 2 energy attacks relatively easily. So yeah, that's the sort of order of what's most important. You could really make an argument for going all the way up to 4th Big Charm, because it is so important to make these Honchkrows untouchable, so that your damage doesn't go anywhere, hopefully. So that's really the big idea. You need to have enough so that you can get towards a 10, 11 tool board state to one-shot VMAXs. There'll be some matchups where you don't need quite that many, especially into 2-prize matchups. That's when you can really see the Pachirisu get aggressive pretty early, actually. So those are matchups you prefer to see, but just something to bear in mind. And the Shopping Center is an obvious stadium. You're terrified of Path, because Honchkrow will then lose its ability and you have to re-establish tools, but also the Shopping Center itself, you know, has really important text, and you can take huge advantage of it in this deck, because you can pick up Exp.Shares when needed. You can move Choice Belts, you know, off of Pachirisu if you need the, or like don't need the immediate damage but want to have something else. You can belt up a Raikou, you can cape up a Raikou, you can do all sorts of interesting things here as well. So really nice stadium card that gives us a lot of benefit here. And then I'm playing 9 energy. Like I said, I like the capture. When you have 6 decent leads as the Patchies and the Raikous, I think it's really solid to have the capture to get you into Honchkrow. Speed Lightning, great for drawing through the deck, super important for an archetype like this that is all about trying to draw the maximum amount of cards on that turn 1 to actually do anything, really, for turn 2 with Pachirisu. And then we have 4 basic lightning, which is going to help us enable the Exp.Share and the Raihan to chain our attackers, so it's also going to be pretty important there. So overall, a pretty simplistic list. Obviously, a ton of your space is eaten up by tools. That's just pretty much mandatory for the deck. And we are using a decent amount of 2 prizes to help us draw through in those openings, because otherwise you're just not getting enough done with your Pachirisu, and you'll just be you know, sort of conceding a ton of turns to actually build up a board state. A few other options, I already mentioned it during the list, but Rescue Carrier certainly is an option. If you're not a fan of the Raikou, for example, I could easily see a Rescue Carrier space coming in here, so that you can try and present even more single prize Pokemon into the active position. But realistically, many decks will be bossing the likes of Lumineon, the likes of Crobat, the likes of Raikou. Honchkrow if they have high damage output. So I think most games it won't come down to you needing more than 4 Pachirisu, but possibly like if you've prized one or something, a rescue carrier could be a good fail-safe here, which is reasonable. Ultra Ball, like I said, we're committing so much space to tools, I can't see much room for Ultra, but the Honchkrow really is the enabler that get things going, and if you're committing things like Quick Ball to Honch rather than to, Crobat, it might mean that, sometimes you're not able to bat dig plus research all in a turn. So it does give you more explosive openings if need be. But do bear in mind you're a 2 energy attachment deck, so even if you pop off on turn 1, it's great for establishing that damage, but you actually can't capitalize until that second turn. So I feel like just having the quicks and the levels makes a decent amount of sense right now. And then trying to go more one prize certainly is reasonable here. If you want to try and strip away down to like 1 bat, no Lumineon, and just have like a barrel package and possibly this Mysterious Tail Mew, which works really well when you have 4 air balloons already in the deck, and you have so many targets here. You have insane odds of hitting, early ball search, of course, but a tool basically every single turn for free from the Mew if ever you're sort of lacking. So that's a great thing to just throw into the active, grab an extra 30 damage, plonk it on the board somewhere, then use barrel to draw back up into some extra cards. Not a bad idea at all if you want to go more down the one prize route, because I do think that is a small issue with the list right now, is that there will be easy prizes around for the opponent as long as they can keep up with, your Pachirisu tempo and sort of like ignore you and boss you all the time. There will be some archetypes that can do that better than others, and we'll look at that now in the sort of matchup chart here. And I think Mew is definitely the king of like, I can just ignore you and race. Basically, they can on turn 2 easily try and take out Honchkrows, even if they are starting to get capes and stuff on them, because they have great damage mods now, especially with their own choice belts that they can play. They can be that explosive. If Meloetta's not answered straight away, it can naturally get up to that sort of 280 hit point damage range, even without tablets and whatnot, so that's very scary. Because it has such high hit points as well, it's sort of later on in the game where you can one-hit KO the Mew, which gives them the chance to do like Psychic Leaps onto the 70 hit point Patchy, which is really bad as well. So they can present an awkward race where they can throw a Meloetta at you early, take some tempo prizes, boss around the board obviously, Psychic Jump if ever you're lacking damage output. So that's naturally pretty awkward. I mean, Mew's the best deck in the game, no doubt, so having a bad matchup to that is not a huge surprise. Also, I've put Single Strike as a pretty awkward one. They can represent a good amount of one prizes, just attacking with Houndooms and more Pekko potentially, whilst also having great Gust and one-hit KO pressure with Umbreon and Urshifu as a combination here. They can one-hit KO Honchkrows when needed, or they can just be using the Umbreon proactively to Gust Bats and Lumineons for easy races early on. So that's something to bear in mind for certain. I put Duraludon as a pretty awkward matchup. We're only playing the 4 basic lightning, so really not having enough dig potential to maintain those and put a lot of pressure on Exp.Share and Raihan. I personally am playing Tool Scrapper in my Arceus Duraludon as well, which will make life even more awkward. So yeah, I do think that's going to be a hard matchup, and just again a lot of meat to get through, and they're going to keep you honest. They're going to be attacking you from turn 2 onwards. With Starbirth, they can be offering early Gust pressure as well. They could go for early Tool Scrapper plus Gust because of this Starbirth as well. They can make life as awkward as possible for you, which is just going to be pretty rough. And then I've also put Ice Rider as a potential bad matchup. They can represent an awkward prize race. They can be using like Rider the High King from very early on with high hit points, and they can be combining this with Path, which I think is the biggest problem, because although Ice Rider isn't the best at like chaining boss because they have to Melanie quite often, if they're timing Path with like Gust plays on the Honchkrow that they've just like taken a ton of tools off of, and then take the 2 prize knockout when its hit points go down to like 250, because you're only able to keep 1 cape on your Honchkrow after a Path, then they can max lance it, take the 2 prize knockout, and yeah, you've lost a ton of damage even if you bounce the stadium afterwards. So yeah, that Ice Rider going to be another awkward matchup. Some of the other ones on the slide here, probably not that awkward. You're pretty decent into most like 2 prize decks, and like other Arceus decks outside of Duraludon, I think you'll do pretty okay against. Suicune, of course, is weak to Lightning, so not a big issue there, even though they can throw some like Inteleons at you and whatnot to try and skew the prize trade. As long as you keep your hit points relatively high, you're not going to get done in by early like quick shooting combos with like Aqua Bullet, because you can even, Big Charm and cape up your Pachirisus in that matchup if need be. The Malamar matchup is going to be more or less a straight race, one prizes into one prizes for the most part, and I think you should be winning that race because Malamar is rarely playing Gust. So I think that one's actually pretty okay. And Surfetch is one of these decks, again, that's going to be majority like one prizer into one prizer, but you're a little bit faster out the gate than them because they are trying to build a board behind like Lax and Cinccino's and stuff. So you can probably just win a race in that respect. On to the closing thoughts then. I don't mind this deck's tempo, actually. I think as long as you find Honchkrow in those opening stages, you actually can like flood the board with a good amount of tools and be representing relatively good damage for that turn too. I think as long as you can get to that threshold of like 10 to 11 tools after like turn 3-4, you are a scary deck. You can get one-hit KOs on basically anything in the game, and you can chain those attackers if things go well in the hand, but your opening is still fragile. And especially if these Honchkrows go down, it's panic stations, basically. So you really have to be worried about that. And unfortunately, one of the better counters to Mew in the game is Path of the Peak right now. And I think people will be not needing to be asked twice to squeeze a Path into their deck. So that can sometimes just be like a big problem for the Honchkrow and can really hurt your damage. And essentially, you just run out of enough like tools in the deck to take one-hit KOs, especially going into like the late game. If they've pathed like multiple times, that could be a huge issue for you. I think overall this deck probably is going to be putting down too many 2 prizes to actually be like an effective racing deck. Because I think there's so much good Gust in the game right now, with Umbreon, with Mew able to play like no-draw supporters and effectively boss every turn if they need to. That's just going to be a big problem for a deck like Tool Drop. I think honestly, I am excited by a number of 1-prize decks in the game, and Tool Drop like isn't the worst of them, but probably isn't going to be as good as like the Mad Parties of the world right now, or even the Rapid Strike Malamar. I think this is going to come up a little bit below those sorts of decks, a little bit less vulnerable to some specific things like Path, like random item lock if ever this deck gets good. Like random item lock could just be a big problem for you as well. So you're going to get hard countered if ever this deck gets too powerful, and I think it's probably going to be outshone by some of the other 1-prize options that now have that breath of life thanks to Manaphy. Let me know what you guys think about Tool Drop. Are you happy to see it returning ever since good old Trubbish and Sigilith being a combination? I did enjoy playing that deck as a fun rogue, and I think this deck is going to fill that same niche for you. Let me hear your thoughts down below, how you would be building it, and where you think it's going to end up in this format. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.